Hi everyone, welcome to my presentation on the financial crisis and moral hazard. You'll notice that this is a very big ethical challenge that was faced in the past financial crisis, given some of the decisions that were being made. And these decisions created a lot of different opportunities. We're going to be discussing the role of the objective of analyze elements of good arguments as part of the process of making a well-informed decision. In this lecture, you're going to learn about the concepts of the financial crisis and how consumers pursued loans they could not afford. We're also going to apply the ethical implications of banks and lenders as well as their moral hazard. The learning objectives for this week will be identifying the relationship between moral hazard and decision making, assess the different experiences a person might encounter when trying to make a well-informed decision as well. Now, when we look at it, it's never been so important for us to evaluate what makes a good argument and how well individuals take time to decide and the influences of those decisions. I look forward to taking you on this path. Contrary to popular beliefs, people do not make decisions that only benefit themselves. Many decisions that people make are based on their families and the greater good for society as well. To better understand the decisions process and how we make a more well-informed decision, we will apply this to the financial crisis. Many consumers took on debt and loans they could not afford. One other argument that we could focus on is that individuals are responsible for their actions. Another argument is banks provided loans to consumers that overextended the amounts that consumers were willing and able to pay back. But banks had an incentive to loan more out, and consumers had the incentive to want a larger purchase as well. Now, some might argue it's a bad decision for banks to take on these types of loans, but it's also a bad choice for consumers not to be able to evaluate the costs of the loans as well. In an article by the Wall Street Journal, it was argued that banks would never loan to consumers that would cause the banks to need a bailout. Now, this was not always the case, and often this was considered the too big to fail syndrome that banks would never expect governments to bail them out. Banks are responsible for some of the decisions that they made, but consumers have to be responsible for evaluating their financial situation as well. Now, the financial crisis caused a major pitfall for the U.S. economy, influenced other economies as well. The international financial system was affected by the financial crisis. First, when investors stopped lending. Now, the financial system was affected by the financial crisis, which first when investors stopped lending to almost all entities, and it caused a crisis that spread through many markets and countries. Now, governments use many different types of fiscal stimulus packages and stability packages to help fix the bank's problems, which led to even more debt and a larger recession. But it also created more stability as well, because it created this way for consumers and the economy to have confidence in understanding that banks still are important to a society. Now, there are also some ethical implications. In Argadana, that site I found, said that points out that moral failings of individuals, organizations or firms, and social ethics as well. Lending companies were forced to change their policies, and governments had to create new policies to avoid the crisis from repeating. The decision process seemed to be based on creating wealth, and the checks and balances was not in place for all parties in the end. And we cannot point to just one person making a bad decision, rather a collective group. Now, while decisions are made by individuals, we see firms use policies based on decision processes. These decision processes are very important because it looks at how the accountability, how the transparency is built. According to an article from the Business Ethics, The financial crisis led to a need for an increase in transparency and accountability from a financial institution. This also had a trickle-down effect on other industries. Now, when financial institutions provided loans to consumers, it was thought that banks would put them at risk or it created a moral hazard. It is a decision for institutions to use guidelines as a set of processes to lend money with very low moral ground. In the Business Ethics magazine, O'Brien reviewed a study by Stanford University, which surveyed about 160 CEOs and directors of North American public and private companies, all of which indicated boards emphasize financial performance above anything else when evaluating CEO performance. Now, what's the difference between deciding the case of moral hazard? Now, a decision, when you look at the definition, it's a decision that tends to be based on the actions or process of making a choice or resolving a question. Now, the idea of moral hazard is when there might be a decline in an incentive to guard against some risk, where someone might be protected from their consequences. So this is where the banks might have had the opportunity to want to actually get more, lend more money. Now, when looking at the role of financial crisis and how it's related to decision making, we must evaluate how people make their choices. Consider your own personal experiences. Now, when you make a choice, it's tend to be based on your own self-interest. Now, there are times when you might make a choice for other people. For example, consider when you buy a home. You could purchase a home or to create a place for your family. You might be buying a home to increase your financial security, have more stability. Lastly, you might buy a home based on your idea or perception of a dream. Many times, a person might use a cost or benefit analysis to make a final decision. Now, what might be a reason for you to take this course? What drives you to get an education? You see, there are many different reasons for people to make a choice and their decision processes behind each choice they make. Now, did you create a list of costs or benefits of going to school? That cost or benefit analysis is an important way to you to understand where you stand, where your financial implications are. Because when you make those decisions, it's very important to evaluate how those decisions will impact your future decisions. And when you go to make decisions with regard to going to college, you want to make sure that you're making the right decision. So when people give you information, that you can interpret that data and that information to ensure that it aligns with your goals. Now, in summary, it's easy to think about what drives us to make choices. However, when we make decisions, it's important to include the cost and benefit analysis. When doing so, it might be easy to think that going back to school is simply too costly. But don't forget that you are getting in a return or your goal. If you think about it, you're investing in yourself to receive more in the future. Much like the many people who purchased a home during the financial crisis, or choices have major consequences, sometimes good and sometimes bad. Either way, we must analyze the decision-making process throughout our life. And these ethical implications will be all around us. We have to ensure that we're making the best decisions to ensure that our goals are properly aligned in the terms of the decisions that we're making and the data that we're receiving. Now, I look forward to your analysis and participation in this lecture this week. And if you have any additional questions, please reach out to me.